We've talked about the forwards, we've talked about the defense. It's time to talk about the goaltending and whether that will look better than it did last year on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And it's also time to talk about goaltending, which I feel like has been the biggest kind of horror show, bugbear, whatever you want to call it, for the Blue Jackets in past seasons. You know, we've talked about how miserable the defense has been. We've talked about how no one can score a goal to save their lives. But I feel like the goaltending, more than any other position on the ice, has had the most stress per 60. Because it's kind of, since Bobrovsky left, it feels a little bit like everything kind of fell apart. Maybe Bobrovsky cursed us, I don't know. But, you know, Bobrovsky leaves, Korpisalo comes in as the starter after years of being a not great backup, is a perfectly acceptable starter for the Blue Jackets. Elvis comes in as the backup, 1A, 1B situation. That doesn't last for long. Elvis has a really great rookie season. And then, you know, the Blue Jackets, it looks like they've got something approaching goalie depth for the first time in a long time. You know, between Korpisalo, Merzlikins in the NHL, they had Vehvilainen and Kivlenieks in the minors. Obviously, there was a lot of potential in Kivlenieks before he passed away. Vehvilainen was traded to Toronto for a defenseman that I think played like 8 games for the Blue Jackets before going back to Finland. And since then, it feels a little bit like they've kind of just been clawing their way along in terms of goaltending for like the past 3 seasons. There's been potential. You know, I think Tarasov has shown a lot of potential. We'll talk about him in a minute. Jack Reeves kind of came out of nowhere. Sergei Ivanov, who they drafted a couple of years ago, just made like 68 saves in a KHL preseason game, which I personally think is too many saves for a preseason game. But hey, that's just me. So the Blue Jackets, as of right now, I think the goaltending looks like it's probably going to be much the same as it was last year in terms of it's going to be Elvis and Tarasov as 1 and 2. I don't know how long that will last. Like, and I have been the biggest Elvis supporter basically in the world, I think. You know, I have defended him until the cows have come home. Well, the cows are coming home. It's been 3 seasons of Elvis saying, I'm going to be better next year. I'm going to have a great season next year. Like, things are going to be different next year. And at some point, like, you stop believing in someone when they say they're going to change, you know? And I don't think all of the goaltending woes have been on Elvis specifically, because, you know, we've seen similar issues with other goalies. You know, I think he has kind of been, I don't think he's had a great season of play basically since his second season in the league. But it's kind of been on and off since then, for me anyway. You know, some games he looks like a Vezina winner. Some games he looks like he is a replacement level AHL goalie, you know, like he's had some absolute horror shows, but he's also had some really, really great performances. So like consistency is a problem, but he has been suffering from the same terrible, miserable defense. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the goaltending fell off a cliff at the same time as like the defense got massively overhauled. You know, so we looked at Bobrovsky leaves. The Blue Jackets technically the Blue Jackets do make the playoffs the year after that. Korpisalo in goal, but like that's the first year I think that they didn't have Savard, who had kind of been holding down that second pairing. You know, Seth Jones was on his way out of town. There was a lot of the defense was never as good as it was kind of those 3-ish years that they made the playoffs under Tortorella. And they've kind of been struggling to get back to that since then. So I'm not surprised that the goaltending has been miserable, but at the same time, when you look at, the stats, and goalie stats don't exist in a vacuum. You can look and say, well, he had a terrible save percentage. And he hasn't had a great save percentage. The last time he had a 900 save percentage was 21-22, and he had a 907. 2021, he had a 916, 2019, 2020, he had a 923. It's tough. It's a shame because you look at his stats before that, and I do think, and this is not something that I think we're ever going to figure out or we're ever going to know, but I wonder how much of his game was put off by, losing his best friend essentially in front of him, and it's tough to kind of sit here and criticize his play when he was, especially the first kind of couple of years after Kivlenix passed, when he was very clearly going through stuff. But is Elvis, and we had a lot of conversations. Elvis is the goalie of the future. He's going to be really great. He one of the things that is really difficult is scouting goalie prospects. And so, I've talked to a couple of prospect experts and right, what do you look for when you're scouting goaltending? And one of them, so Will Scout, who is one of the better, if not the best prospect guy doing public scouting work, he was like, does he stop the puck at every single level that he plays? And Elvis did. From the time he turned pro all the way up, he didn't have a sub 900 save percentage playing in league hockey until 2 seasons ago, 22-23. So all the way through when he was playing in Switzerland for HU Lugano, 921, 921, 916, 922, 913, 924 as an under 20. And then going all the way back, so he's stopped the puck a lot in his early days. So it doesn't make sense that he would just suddenly drop off a cliff now, but he did. So now the Blue Jackets have to decide, well, what are we going to do with Elvis, and what are we going to do with Tarasov? Because at a certain point, do you cut your losses with Elvis? I'm not saying get rid of him. I'm not saying, I don't think that contract is particularly tradable. I don't think buying him out is the option. I think buyout is looking pretty unlikely at this point. I'm trying to find the buyout costs as we speak, but I'll go on and I'll talk a little bit more about kind of Elvis as a whole. He's gonna be with the team probably for most of the rest of this contract, and I think the hope is that he can figure it out. You put better defense in front of him, and you kind of, and I think that's the plan, is they've upgraded the defense a little bit, and I think they're going to hope for the best. But at what point do you say, right, whatever, that is a waste of our money, you can sit on the bench and we'll play Tarasov? And that was kind of something that happened this season, was he kind of got relegated to third goaltender between, I believe it was Tarasov and Spencer Martin at the time, or Korpisalo and Spencer Martin. I don't remember off the top of my head who the three rotating goalies were, whether it was, oh, no, it wouldn't have been Korpisalo because he was a Senator last season. So it would have been Tarasov and Martin. So, and he was the third goalie behind those two guys. So at what point do you say, right, well, we have, we're leaving wins on the table when we play Elvis, so we have to not play Elvis. And that's kind of a problem in and of itself. But I do think, at what point do you, like I said, cut your losses and you're like, right, we think Tarasov is a future starter. Let's do that. Let's go for it. If you buy out Elvis, by the way, I found it, you will be paying him $1.75 million for the next 6 seasons, or you pay him $5.4 million for the next 3 seasons. And I really think that might be a conversation that happens kind of after next season, because I think this is going to be a season where Tarasov is going to get some big minutes. And I think they're going to look and they're really going to see, okay, what do we have in Tarasov? I think getting rid of Elvis now might be not a mistake necessarily, but it's going to put a lot of pressure on, again, the younger goalies in the league and the younger goalies in the organization. Everyone's going to get bumped up a spot, so that probably means that Greaves will go from starter in the AHL to backup in the NHL. I don't think that's wise. I think he's a goalie that you need to get him games. You need to get him reps. You know, he's useless to you sitting on the bench. If Tarasov is the starter, fine, but they need to find someone that isn't Greaves to back up, which makes me think, okay, Zach Sorchenko, who they signed in free agency, is he a guy? But if he's not the guy, what are they going to do? Because I don't know how long that they can keep running Elvis back if he continues to struggle, because at a certain point, it's a psychological thing. You struggle in a game, so you try harder next game, but trying harder means you overreact. And I saw a lot of that from Elvis this season when I was watching, is you can kind of see when a goalie's fighting it, because they overreact a lot and they will, overreach, overstretch, they'll overplay the puck. It's frustrating to watch, because you look at it and you're like, listen, you could do 80% of what you're doing and it will be fine, but because you're doing it at 100%, it's all going badly. So what do the Blue Jackets do next season? Let's talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk a little bit more about Tarasov in just a second here at Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about Game Time. I love going to last-minute Sharks games. Not the Sharks games that are last minute, but sometimes my fiance and I will finish work and we'll be like, oh, hey, let's go watch the Sharks. Tickets are $18, and we get them on Game Time because it's just better than every other competing ticket service. They have all-in prices that you can toggle on, so you don't have to get surprised by checkout fees. They have Game Time picks, which they curate things for you to make it easier to save more. They get rid of all of the fluff, all of the overpriced tickets, all of the you don't have to scroll through thousands of tickets to try and find the ones that you want. You can get views from your seat. They've got a low price guarantee. So if you find tickets in your section and row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 100%, 10% of the difference. And your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So go ahead and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Let's talk about Tarasov. And we'll talk about the goaltending as a whole, but I want to talk a little bit about Tarasov because this is a huge year for him, I think. And I think this is where the fork in the path begins, because there's a world where the Blue Jackets run it back with Elvis and decide he's the starting goalie. He's being paid like a starting goalie. Let's go ahead and, the ship sails or sinks with Merzlikins. But there's a world in which, like I talked about in a little bit the last segment, there's a world in which they decide, okay, Tarasov is the future. Tarasov is the starting goalie right now. If Elvis wants his net back, he's got to earn it. And I guess you have to look at, do you want to go with young potential? Tarasov, I think, is a really solid goalie. I think he's an underrated goalie. I think his development has really been up and down. He's been injured a lot the past couple of seasons. He's not played a lot sometimes, and sometimes he's played a ton. There's been lots of up and down, lots of, like I said, the Blue Jackets rotating 3 goalies for the bulk of last season. You're not going to get the right development experience, especially for a guy like Tarasov, who I think is probably older than a lot of people think, because obviously he's only been in the league for a couple of years, but he is actually, I want to say he's 24, 25. So he's 25 years old. And this will be his 4th season with the Blue Jackets. And I thought he was very good this season. Again, behind a miserable defense, which I still think that more pressure is on the defense to improve than the goaltending, because believe it or not, the goalies improved last season from the season before, which, the bar was low. All Elvis had to do was not be literally the worst goalie in the league, and he wasn't. There were, a fair few notable goalies that had lower save percentages than him, for example. And from there, it's kind of tough to look at it in terms of, okay, what do they do now? And I think the answer might be give Tarasov the start. Give Tarasov the starter's net. Treat him like the starter. See what you've got there. And I think that was where they had the most success with Tarasov was last season when he was playing I think he played. There was a time where he played, I think, 10 of 12 games, and that was, I think, the best that we saw from Tarasov. And he, I think, is one of those goalies like Korpisalo. The more he plays, the better he is. Some goalies are built to be starters. Some goalies are built to be backups. Some goalies, I think a lot about Curtis McElhinney, who was a quietly really, really solid backup for Bobrovsky. He didn't play a ton, but when he had to step in there, he was decent, Korpisalo was not that. Korpisalo was a goalie that got rusty, which is not a bad thing. But I feel like Tarasov kind of has some of the same issues where if he doesn't play for a few days or if he doesn't play for a week, say, then it's kind of always an adventure getting him back in the crease. So what do the Blue Jackets do about that? Because arguably they've got two guys here that they need to treat like starters to see what they have. It's in their best interest to try and get the Elvis of 3 years ago back, and it's in their best interest to see what they have with Tarasov, because otherwise there's another goalie that the potential, it was there and then it was all gone. It's not exactly the same situation as Yaroslav Askarov, who they signed Juicy Saros to a huge contract. That's fine, but that meant that there was nowhere for Askarov to go except be a backup for the next 8 years or whatever. So I think Tarasov, you're kind of reaching a similar-ish point with him where you need to see what he's made of. Is he going to be the starter? And if he is, then you've got to run with him, And so we'll see what happens there. But that, to me, feels like the key in the goaltending this season. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about mostly in this episode is how do the Blue Jackets have the best possible goaltending? So this year it will be different because the Blue Jackets this season, their goaltending was weak, I think it's fair to say. It was definitely the defense was miserable, don't get me wrong, but I feel like the goaltending was troubling, let's say. The save percentage above expected. The best of the bunch was Malcolm Subban, who played one game. He had a save percentage above expected of .023. Greaves had a save percentage above expected of .006. Daniil Tarasov was dead on with his expected save percentage, and Elvis Merzlikins was minus .002. Malcolm Subban, again, best of the lot, save percentage, 914. Greaves and Tarasov both had 908. Elvis had an 897. Not great goaltending, especially when you talk about the fact that, the guy leading the way had the weakest stats. So if we look at just purely at minutes played, Greaves had 515. Tarasov had 1376. Elvis Merzlikins had 2258. So almost 1,000 minutes more than Tarasov for 0.11 percentage points less, or 0.011 percentage points less. I can't do math. So what do you do? What do you do with this? You're going to run back to the same goaltender because you don't really have an option to do anything else. They could have bought Elvis out this offseason, but I don't know. It didn't seem prudent. It didn't seem like the wisest course of action. I think this is his last chance. This season is his last chance. I don't think Don Waddell is going to stand for any kind of subpar goaltending from Elvis this season. This very, very clearly feels like, listen, we've done what we can. Now it's your turn. You know, we have done what we can to improve the defense. Now what we need is for you to not fall apart every other game. And, you know, obviously part of it is it's not his fault. The defense is bad. I think he missed a lot of time this season between like injuries and illness. Elvis gets ill a lot, which I don't fully understand. Like, he only played 41 games this season, which for a starting goalie, you want them to be getting, 50, maybe even 60 games. How many starts will either of these guys get in terms of Tarasov and Elvis this season? I don't know. I'd like to think that it's probably closer to 50-50, but I suspect it could be more like, I think Elvis is going to get more starts at the beginning of the season, and then I think Tarasov is going to slowly take over the way he did last season. I think he's going to finish really strong. So, like, maybe they split maybe it's a 1A, 1B type situation. Maybe they split the starts. Maybe, both guys play 40 games. I'm assuming that both guys are going to miss a little bit of time just because of how goaltending works. Like, not every goalie is going to be Connor Hellebuck, for example, who plays a bajillion games every single season. I'm just going to look at how many games he played this season. Okay, he only played 60 games this season. Georgiev played 63. UC Saros led the way. He played 64 of 82 games this season. So, like, what happens now? Do you play Tarasov? Do you play Elvis? I genuinely don't know what the answer to this is. I know what I would do. And I think that what I would do is I would cut my losses with Elvis, quite frankly. I think you are leaving more money on the table if you go with Elvis than if you go with Tarasov. I think there is more potential in Tarasov. I think Elvis was a really, really bright star 4 years ago and hasn't really lived up to that incredible rookie season that he had. We talk about, what was it, 5 shutouts in 8 games or something. Really, really fun rookie season, and then everything kind of fell apart after that. Not really due to his own doing or due to anyone's doing, really. It was just kind of a really unfortunate situation in all aspects of the situation. Tarasov, to me, is the future right now. I think the Blue Jackets are in a quietly really good place with the goalie pipeline right now. I know Elvis is still part of that pipeline technically, but I look at, what the depth chart is like for this team, and for the first time in a while, I'm like, oh, okay. The Blue Jackets are not going to have to sign emergency goalies because all of them get injured at the same time, knock on wood. I'm just going to hope that they don't have to use 7 goalies like they did a couple of seasons ago. What's that pipeline look like? Well, let's talk about that, because I wanted to kind of briefly touch on that, and we'll do that after a very quick break here on Locked on Blue Jackets. Welcome back to Locked on Blue Jackets. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We're talking about goaltending on today's episode. We've talked about Elvis versus Tarasov. Is the goaltending going to be better this season than last season? I don't know. I think it'll look better. I don't know if it will actually be better, though. But I wanted to talk about kind of what I did with the forward group and the defensive group. Was I kind of was like, right, what is this group missing? And where can they get that? And it's kind of, again, a similar-ish situation with the goaltending, which is, if everything goes right, and that's a really tough thing, that's a really big if, because as we all know, goaltending is wizardry. It makes no sense, and there's absolutely no way to predict anything that's going to happen, because sometimes a guy that you think is going to be a stud plays 4 NHL games total, and then sometimes a guy that is undrafted goes in and plays like 700 NHL games. So there's really like no way to know. But the Blue Jackets right now have a goaltending depth chart that I think is it's pretty good. I feel good about it. I think, I've been banging the drums for Sergei Ivanov basically since he was drafted. I think he's great. I think that he, size, whatever, like he is the kid can play, and there's not really any way to deny that. Kid can play. That's what it is. He has great stats. Nothing in the NHL yet, obviously, but he had really great numbers in the KHL last season. He had a 928 save percentage in 33 games with Admiral Vladivostok, and that was as a 19-year-old. He literally just turned 20 in April. He's 5'10", 5'11". It's listed as 6 foot on this, but like so is Jack Greaves, and Jack Greaves isn't 6 foot. So, he's got a really, really bright future. I think I'm really excited to see what he does when he gets to North America, which hopefully will be at the end of this season or potentially next season. In terms of like other goalies, like Evan Gardner, I think was a really wise pick. He still isn't the goalie that I would have chosen if I had to pick a goalie with that pick, but watched a little bit of his game. Again, kid's got a bright future. Jet Greaves, obviously, everyone in Columbus loves Jet Greaves at the minute. He is kind of the it goalie for this team. Came out of nowhere, undrafted, was like basically an emergency signing. And when the Blue Jackets realized that Tarasov wasn't going to be able to play in the prospect tournament in Traverse City, so they basically grabbed a goalie. And Jack Greaves hadn't played for an entire season before that because the OHL shut down, so no one in the OHL played. They grabbed him. They said, hey, here we go. Let's see what he's got. He was great at Traverse City, and since then has become one of the best goalies in the AHL, for my money. AHL All-Star this season. I think he's only going to get better from here, and played pretty damn well when he was in Columbus as well. He's played 10 NHL games so far and has a 912 save percentage, and he's under contract for 2 more seasons, which is great. So you look at him, you look at Ivanov, you look at Tarasov, like all 3 of those guys, I think, are the guys that you really focus on. Obviously, there's Evan Gardner. Melvin Strahl is going to be a really interesting guy to watch this season. He's playing for the Youngstown Phantoms of the USHL. So he, I think, is going to be a guy to watch. Know basically nothing about him beyond the fact that he's a goalie. They took him in the 5th round last season, I think. Zach Storchenko was a really fun story last year in the AHL as well. He was the Abbotsford Canucks 3rd string goalie. So, he was the 5th string goalie for the Vancouver Canucks organization. And then when Demko went down in the playoffs, and then DeSmith also went down in the playoffs, like Archer Seelovs went up, and Sheelov's backup also went up to the NHL. So Zach Storchenko kind of held down the fort in the AHL, and I think did a pretty good job of it. So interested to see what he does in the AHL this season. This is a really solid backup for Greaves. And also, I think it's a guy that, if there are injury issues, which I'm going to knock on wood once again, it's very much a case of, do we leave, can we just leave Jet Greaves in the AHL? We'll call up Storchenko. He can back up Tarasov or Elvis or whoever's not injured, and go from there. And it means that you're not dragging Greaves up and down the state of Ohio every 2 weeks whenever Elvis gets a cold or whatever. It gives the AHL duo some stability. Last season they had they brought in Malcolm Subban at the deadline. They had God, I don't remember what the backup was in. I believe it was mostly Pavel Chayan for a large part of the season, who is an ECHL goalie, really, which again, that will give him a chance to keep developing there. Nolan Lalonde has aged out of junior, so he's probably also going to be going to the ECHL, but it gives them, again, more insurance with goaltending for the Monsters, specifically this season, and also the Blue Jackets as well. Not that I'm suggesting that Lalonde or Chayan are going to be NHL goalies this season, but there's a lot happening there. Yeah, Pavel Cheyenne played 22 games for the Monsters. Malcolm Subban played 4 games for the Monsters. Jet Graves played 46. And then Tarasov played 4. He went down for a conditioning stint, I believe. So Graves is the goalie of the future there. Do you leave him there? And you've got Sorchenko to kind of pull from there. And then if you need to, you can pull Cheyenne up from the ECHL. You can pull Lalonde up from the ECHL. Like there's things this team can do with its goaltending that they didn't have 2 seasons ago when they had to sign Jet Greaves to an NHL contract basically because every other goalie in the organization was injured. He didn't play, he sat on the bench, but that was why he got his NHL entry level, or if they signed into an NHL deal, was because Korpisalo was done, was injured, excuse me. Tarasov was injured, Elvis was injured, they had to call up Greaves to back up. I want to say JF Berube, honestly. So do I think the goaltending is going to be better this year than last year? Maybe. I'm still unsure about that. Just to kind of wrap up my thoughts on this. I think the future is bright for the goaltending. I wouldn't be surprised if the goaltending this year looks a little bit rough. I think it might be kind of an adventure for people to watch. And here's the thing. Elvis could be a Vezina level goalie this season, or he could be virtually unplayable, and there's really no way to know. It genuinely wouldn't shock me either way. I think I'm leaning more towards him looking unplayable versus looking like a Vezina candidate, but man, I would love for some certainty in goaltending. I would love if the Blue Jackets could get hold of, and this is not necessarily what the Blue Jackets goalie depth is missing, because I think it's really hard to find an elite goalie. How many elite goalies are in the league right now? Because it might be 5. I think there's a lot of very, very good goalies. How many goalies in the NHL would you say are genuinely elite? Hellebuyck, Vasilevsky, Saros, Shesterkin, maybe Sorokin. Arguably you put Bobrovsky in there. Arguably you put Linus Ullmark in there. Arguably put Swayman there. I don't know that I would put those 3 guys in there necessarily, but here we are. How many elite goalies are in the NHL? It would be nice if the Blue Jackets could go out and just find a UC Saros, but they're not just lying around. So the Blue Jackets are going to have to do what they do with the goaltending that they have right now. There's a lot of talk about can they go ahead and get Markstrom? He wants out of Calgary. Hellebuyck might not want to re-sign in Winnipeg. Can we go out and get him? Do we try and go out and get Askarov and he's your kind of blue chip goalie prospect of the future? None of these, to me anyway, were really options. I think the goaltending is going to look like it looks probably until at least the end of next season, potentially the season after that, depending on what happens with Elvis. This goaltending is going to live and die by Elvis, regardless of whether he plays or not, because right now they don't have the money to go out and get an elite goalie or even, upgrade in goal without shedding that salary. And to shed that salary, you're going to have to give up something substantial, and people had conniptions when they gave up a 2nd round pick to shed the Line A salary. So, what are we doing here? But my overarching point here is the goaltending is going to be what it is. I don't know if it's going to be better than last year. I hope it is. I think it'll be different, which can only be a good thing. As long as the goaltending is not worse, then I've made my peace with it. See what Elvis does this season. See what Tarasov does this season. Continue monitoring the kids that are in the system. And if they have to ride this bump until Elvis's contract is done, so be it. I hope that it's not that, because that's going to be a long 3 years of disappointing goaltending. We saw what the Devils looked like last season when that is a very, very good young team that made the playoffs easily the year before. And then this season, they fell apart because they couldn't get a save. And I don't want to have to watch that with the Blue Jackets because I'm already watching it with the Blue Jackets, you know? But if everyone else starts performing above expectations and the goaltending is what's holding them back, like, that's going to be really tough to swallow. So that's kind of, and again, to reiterate my point about Tarasov, that's kind of why I would go with Tarasov, I think. I think there's more grace with Tarasov. I think there's a longer leash with Tarasov. He's still learning. He's not a prospect technically, but he's still I would argue, still a developing goalie. And we'll kind of see what happens from there. That's kind of what I've got for today. No episode tomorrow because I am traveling, and there will be no episode probably Monday or Tuesday next week. We'll be back on Wednesday when I am done traveling. There might be an episode if something happens, but don't count on it. Thank you for listening to this episode, making us your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms. We're over on YouTube and on SiriusXM. Thank you once again for listening. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay, or until Wednesday, excuse me, make sure you stay locked on.